Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our summer tour with a difference. Normally we'd be standing here in the middle of a beautiful green field. Might be a little bit wet, but usually it's good weather for a big crowd of people. This year we've had to do a little bit differently, and we're having our virtual tour, I suppose you could call it. It's probably a sign of the times we're living in. We can't have our summer tour without our host farmers. And just a little bit different this year, we went back to some of the former hosts that we've had over the years. And one of the bonuses for you all watching in, instead of having 2 farms to visit, we've had 3. The beauty of it is, there's 3 family farms. It's quite clear from the videos and from listening to what they have to say, and I'm sure from the questions and answers later on, that family is very important to them. What's very interesting about the 3 farms is, when we were chatting to them before, or when we were trying to persuade them to partake in this exercise with us, they all were quite convinced that not much had changed on their farm since we visited them last. But you can see from the interviews that quite a lot has changed. And I suppose it's no harm every now and again to stop and take stock of where you are, where you've come from, and perhaps what your thought process would be going into the future. We have seen where they were. We've seen where they're going, where they've come to, and Stuart and his team in the panel discussion later will probably delve a little bit further into where they intend to go in the future. Joining us tonight will be Stuart Childs, who's the chairman of the organising committee. He will be joined on stage by David Kerr, Henry Walsh and Conor Creedon, who have featured in the videos. Tig Buckley will be joining us later on. And I suppose there's very little more for me to say except to thank you all for joining us. I'd particularly like to thank the 3 hosts and their families for agreeing to do this. No easy thing to do when you're asked to do something differently, but they had no hesitation whatsoever. Stuart Childs and his team, I think, it is so different than what we're used to doing in the grassland. I'm delighted they just stepped up. There was no hesitation, and very ably assisted by Maura back in head office. I'm sure you all know Maura well at this stage. And lastly, we can't do any of this without the help of AIB. AIB, we spoke to them earlier in the year. We explained to them what the position was, and they told us they would not be found wanting. So I'm very grateful to them. I'm very grateful that you all could join us this evening. So without any further ado, I hand directly over to Stuart Childs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our presentation tonight. You're joining us here live from the Radisson Blue, just on the outskirts of Limerick City. And as Paul has said, I'm joined by David Kerr, Henry Walsh and Conor Creedon, who have featured in our videos over the last 3 days. So hopefully you've managed to see the videos, but just in case some people that are tuning in haven't, I'm just going to get each of the lads to describe their situation since they hosted the tour. David in 2014, Henry in 2015, and Conor in 2016. So we'll keep it in chronological order. So we'll start with you, David, if you don't mind. Just give us a brief rundown on where you were at the time the tour was on your farm in 2014, and where you've come from in the intervening time, please.
Okay, in 2014, we had 64 hectares. We were milking 140 cows. We had all our calves on the farm. Our replacement heifers, maiden heifers, were being contract reared. And there was a small sheep enterprise on the farm. Since that time, we've moved to 150 cows at the moment. We have milked more in the intervening period, but we've settled at 150 at the moment. All replacements are being contract reared in Kilkenny, and the small sheep flock remains. So,
that sheep flock.
Yeah.
So just on the contract rearing, I suppose, as you said, you'd moved from a partial kind of contract rearing arrangement in 2014 to full contract rearing, and you're very clear on the conversations that I've had with you in preparation for this about how important that contract rearing arrangement is for you. I suppose first thing I'd ask you is, Kilkenny's a little step away from County Laois. How did you come across a person for contract rearing that was that bit of a distance away? Does it bother you? And we'll say again, just to outline how important that is to your business, and how you've described it to us as how your contract rearer now drives your business for you.
Well, we're actually contract rearing for 11 years at this stage. The maiden heifers left the farm 11 years ago, and the heifer calves left the farm in 2015. It was quite hard to source a contract rearer 11 years ago. There wasn't too many at it. I happened to source a guy who had been working at it abroad, and he wanted a job along with what he was doing at that time. So I was with him for 5 years. He got to the stage where they had expanded their own dairy farm at home, and he couldn't contract rear anymore. So he recommended another man actually in the same parish, and I've been with that man ever since. Both guys are really, really good. The guy I'm with at the moment is probably as preferable to the fact he has significant winter housing, which actually helps our farm in the sense that he can house the heifers, and we don't bring them home until 10 days before calving. He's doing an exceptional job rearing the stock. If you get well-grown replacement heifers onto your farm from whatever source, they're going to hit the ground running as regards production and fertility. And that's what he's doing at the moment, and we're very, very happy with that arrangement.
Okay, so the contract rearing freed up land on your own block, we'll say obviously to milk cows, and you have said in your videos that you have the capacity to go to maybe 170, potentially even 180 cows. I suppose the question that I'd have for you is, how come you haven't gone there already? Now, you said you've milked a few more already, but you've settled at the 150, 55 mark currently.
Well, in 2014, we had a fairly significant soil fertility issue. We soil tested in 2013, and the biggest mistake was we hadn't soil tested for 4 years, and then discovered that we had an issue which was going to take some time to solve. We milked some extra cows, but we were just actually buying extra purchase feed in the form of forage to fill the gap, because we weren't growing the grass. So we settled back at 150 for the last couple of years, but we have solved the soil fertility issue, and we're reseeding now. We've reseeded 17% of the farm over the last 2 years. We can see the surge of grass coming there at the moment, and I expect that we'll go for the 10% extra cows next year, comfortable in the knowledge that we can grow the winter feed without purchasing anything significant from outside the farm.
So you've seen the benefit already of the reseeding program that you've implemented?
Yeah, we've reseeded with the Aber-Choice and Aber-Gain standard ryegrass mixtures with white clover on the field that we reseeded this year, and it's exceptional when you see the actual performance from the reseeded pastures, assuming the soil fertility is good. But we saw no point in doing any great reseeding until the soil fertility issue was solved first. So then we could actually reseed fields that would get real bang for our buck, and take out the fields that were performing poorly at the bottom of the ladder.
Okay, very good. So Henry, I'll come to you now. Like David was of the opinion that he hadn't changed much, but he was changing a lot of things underneath. I suppose yourself and Enda have changed a lot of things physically on the ground, and also increased numbers as well. So will you just outline your situation since the tour in 2015?
Yeah, we hosted the tour in 2015. At that stage, it was just the end of quotas. We had expanded the herd from 200 to 240 in that particular year. But in reality, that was, I suppose, a culmination of as much as 20 years of expansion, in that we'd been working away since I was milking 50 cows in 1996. We had continuously lifted numbers through lease and otherwise, through extra land, luckily becoming available to us to lease on the adjacent to the milking platform. And through growing more grass. That time we were very, very focused, because we'd no winter housing, on winter blocks, extending the winterage, I would say, extending the grazing season, if you want to describe it as that, to become winter blocks that we could outwinter the animals. And it allowed us to plough pretty much all of our resources into extra livestock, growing extra tons of grass. And at that time we had a 16-unit milking facility that was more than adequate throughout all the early years, but came under incredible pressure because of the amount of rows of cows we were milking at the very end. Prior to our recent changes, we were milking 18 lines of cows. So coinciding, I suppose, with Enda completing college in dairy business in Dublin, and addressing the kind of the next generation and succession, if you want to put it that way, we made a decision that the infrastructure wasn't adequate, in particular the milking facilities or the housing facilities, as we continue to expand dairy cow numbers. So this year we got to 320. We've settled back a few through, culling a few problem cows and so on like that. So this year we got to 320 cows, and that's probably where we'll settle, at 4 cows to the hectare. And it's based on growing the amount of grass we grow, and we import all winter feed from outside. And we're also importing a certain amount of round bales for feeding during the lactating period that the cows are milking from the outside blocks.
Just to clarify, so when you say that you're importing it from, it's actually from ground that you're farming outside,
Yeah,
but it's just coming off from outside of the platform.
Correct, Stuart. We're lucky enough that we have a lot of land available to us outside to lease. And I suppose the drawback with that is that it's not available as milking platform. So this is where the real trade-off is coming for us in terms of ideally we'd like to be stocked at 3 cows to the hectare, maybe even 2.9. But the milking platform is not of a scale to allow that, whereas we have a lot of support land and we're trying to utilise it as best we can. And at this point, we've put in a fantastic new milking facility, a 50-pint rotary parlour. We've increased our cubicles, so we've excellent wintering facilities. And the real debate we'll have now would be, a lot of people would consider a second unit in that particular situation in terms of managing time and family life and so on like that. To date, we've made the decision to stick with the primary milking platform and not step out into a second unit, spreading, limited resources, spreading our labour and perhaps, placing too much of a burden on the labour available.
Okay, just in terms of, I suppose it's going to be a question that'll be on many people's minds maybe is, and I know when we'll be talking to Tyg later, from talking to him in the past, that there's been a big lift in the last 12, 18 months, 2 years in the number of rotaries that are actually going through financing with them and all the other banks as well. The decision to go for the rotary over the herringbone, was it an easy one or did it take a bit of time to come to the...
Yeah, it definitely took a bit of time. We're milking 300 cows, and I would suggest, unless you're incredibly well resourced financially, 300 is the absolute minimum that you should consider a rotary at. Yeah, definitely we agonised for quite a period of time. Eventually we made the decision on the 50-pint rotary. Having done it, we're delighted. Like a lot of decisions we make in life, it can be a really big challenge to make them. But since we put in the parlour, February, 12 months, so we've pretty much 18 months almost, 2 lactations completed. It has completely transformed the working environment on our farm. The physical demands of milking that amount of cows through a restricted scale of a herringbone was just unsustainable. And we're at the start of, as I've mentioned already, a transition in terms of stepping from one generation to the next. So at this point we felt confident that we were putting in a facility that would hopefully function for a minimum of 25 or 30 years, as in a generation of farming. It's not something I would even have considered myself at my age, only for Enda had made a decision to join us on the farm.
Very good. And Conor, we'll come to you now. Since 2016, I suppose you've added land to the platform and increased numbers fairly significantly, really. So you can just run us through the journey.
Yeah, I suppose in 2016 we were milking 95 or 96 cows, rearing about 20 replacement heifers, so it's kind of 20% replacement rate. But we were breeding a lot more. We were selling a big amount of surplus heifer calves. So in 2017 then we got access to land next to the milking platform. In 2018 then we done some building work to accommodate extra cows, I suppose, put in a new collecting yard with a feed unit and converted the old centre passage in a slatted shed into cubicles. And in 2019 then we got access to more land, which allowed us to increase cow numbers significantly. So we were in contract rearing as well in the meantime. We were at what heifers we could ourselves. We were at all the calves and we send them out a bit like David started as yearlings for contract rearing, and we have moved to completely contract rearing this spring, so they're going 2 weeks old. We've moved up to 144 cows, so we have 50% increased in a couple of years. Yeah, so we'd begin.
You've done 2 big things there, I suppose, in terms of going to the contract rearing situation and also taking on the extra land in the one go. Have you found that a challenge in terms of financial? You would have been running a very efficient operation prior to that.
Yeah, it was. We didn't take on any extra borrowing, so we've done everything out of cash reserves and cash flow. It was working fine, but we hit a health problem last year and we didn't sell as much milk solids as we thought, so it got tight enough in the last year. But other than that, we were very, I suppose we were disciplined in our spending on the land, and especially disciplined in our spending in the building. We didn't do anything fancy.
Yeah, so a little like Henry's said there, in relation to their situation, you're probably putting in hours in the parlour at the moment.
Yeah,
So you have hope to do something in that space in maybe 2 to 3 years' time?
In 2 to 3 years' time, yeah. Through the peak this year, I put in a lot of hours myself. I have a relief milker as well, does a good few milkings, but I put in a lot of hours in the parlour this spring, yeah, I did.
So something similar, I suppose, Henry, you said, Conor, the day that we were down with you, that you've kind of you've thrown labour at the problem in the short term. Is that something you would have done, Henry, as well?
Most definitely, and I think it's incredibly important that you stay with labour, because for the most part labour is available if you pay it well and respect the labour. It is available, and you know, one of the great challenges for any of us is taking on significant debt. That's a burden that can overwhelm any of us, but for the most part, if you work with people and get on with people and create a good working environment, you will get the labour.
Very good. And David, I was on your farm 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was. We were looking at your parlour at the time, and you moved into, I think it's a 22 unit, is it? But you, again, similar to both the lads here, you've done the hard yards in an older parlour at one stage too.
Well, we went from a 6 unit to a 22 unit the last year, and the 22 unit we were putting 90 cows through it, so that was fairly tedious, and building the new parlour at the same time. So nearly the good was gone out of the new parlour by the time we got to it, to be honest. It wasn't until the following year we got 22. It's effectively 7 rows, or it's 6 rows and 2 half rows generally, the way it works out, and it's very, very comfortable. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
So there's just one question for you, David, actually, in terms of how do you prevent system slip? So once you've got the cows milking it that you require, how do you stop yourself tinkering with the system, really, like?
I would say the biggest danger to any farmer is boredom, I'd say, when things are going well. So get yourself a pastime, or look outside the farm and look at something else before you try and make things complicated for yourself.
Very good. Yeah. So Conor, I suppose in terms of growing the herd from organically, as we were saying just before we started, I suppose you had a lot of work to do on the outside land in terms of infrastructure, and I think a very important point to make is that you invested in roadways to access grass in the shoulders of the year as much to access the farms. There was a good bit of spending to be done, and you weren't really ready to take on the stock necessarily with that new land. So again, how did you prepare for that? Because you knew it was going to be a challenging period, I suppose, and you said then about hitting the health issue as well.
Yeah. So like I said, we were breeding the cows to dairy anyhow. So we were getting the calves every spring. So we had the calves the first spring. So we kept the calves ourselves. We kept almost 50 calves the first year we got the land, and we grazed the calves on that old grass. It hadn't been grazed for about 12 or 15 years. So it was not the thing you would live maybe calves into, but look, we got away with it anyway. And that allowed us space to do that farm, to reseed and access that farm, put roadways and water into it, as I said. But then we had to look for somewhere to rear them. We knew we couldn't rear 50. We hadn't enough land to rear 50 heifers. So we had to put them down the contract rearing route in the second season. So look, at that stage, we knew what we were doing. We could budget for it, that cost was going out. So that's really the way we had them. We just had them coming on. Then we had a big batch of them coming in just as the second land came on. So we actually had the second land stocked before we had it got, if you like. Right. And we went into that reseeding it in early April, and we had the cows in the ground milking at that stage. So we had a real high stocking rate in the spring of 19, which was a good spring to have a high stocking rate. We had a bit of luck, like every store. We had a bit of luck.
Very good. So I suppose you mentioned the reseeding there, and soil fertility is a common trend across the three of you. So we're just going to go to Stan Lawler, who's the Vice President of the IGA and works with Grassland Agro, obviously, just to have a piece on soil fertility there.
So the farmers we're speaking to tonight are growing a lot of grass. And any farmer that wants to grow a lot of grass knows that the grass has to be grown out of the soil, and having the soil and the soil fertility underneath as productive and as good as possible is a very important factor to be looking after when we're managing our farms to grow grass. There's been a lot of progress made nationally in the trends we see in recent years on the improvements in soil fertility levels, whether that's phosphorus or K or lime. There's also been a lot of progress on individual farms to show that where farmers do pay attention to this in terms of good fertiliser planning and good fertiliser application and nutrient management, progress can be made in boosting the fertility, and that will follow through in terms of grass growth. We see a lot of pressure in the future around how we manage our soils to be more productive. We can see the evolution of various policies at EU and national level that are putting more pressure and focus on things like nitrogen fertilisation. We also see a much higher interest level in things like soil health, soil condition, soil biological activity, soil structure, and all of these other aspects of the soil that go over and beyond what we're used to looking at in our traditional soil tests. There are some basic priorities to be keeping an eye on, and we're well aware of these in terms of making sure your soil pH is right and you're applying lime, making sure your phosphorus indexes are where they need to be, and particularly the benefits of careful management of phosphorus, particularly in the spring period when the response to phosphorus is at its most high. And likewise, managing potash being the other key nutrient we get from soil tests. Very important to bear that in mind, particularly focusing on areas being cut for silage, be it short-term bales or whether it's big silage crops, has a big impact on K fertility as well. But the key when it comes to managing your soil fertility is to put a good plan in place for your farm that tries to factor in all of these various aspects, bringing in some of the newer concepts around are you managing your soils correctly in terms of the physical and the biological health of the soil, in addition to the soil chemistry, and making a fertiliser plan that's very simple to operate, very simple to implement. It makes your purchasing of fertilisers easier when it comes to the actual point when you're making your decisions on what to buy, but most importantly, a good plan in place that makes sure that you know where to go with what product on what day and how that fits in with your lime applications, and most crucially within the farm, how that fits in with your slurry or farmyard manure applications as well. And if you can have a good simple fertiliser plan in place that addresses the particular issues you have with your soil on your farm, that is the key to making sure you grow as much grass as possible and you feed your animals and you have a profitable system.
So thanks for that, Stan. So David, you probably alluded to it already along the lines of what Stan has been talking about there in terms of needing to improve your soil fertility that you discovered in 2013 that you were after letting it slip in a very short period of time. So I suppose a question for the three of you, and we'll start with you again, David. How have you worked on that to try and get it back up to where you need it to be? And you're pretty much confident that you're nearly there to where you have to get to now at this stage, and you're hoping to build on that now, as you said, with your reseeding program now. But how did you get there?
I suppose the most important thing is actually the soil test. I mean, you can deplete soil fertility very quickly. It takes a long time to regain it. I think you have to be testing every 2 years, really, when you get into that situation. Probably I went every year, actually, for first 3 years. To build it takes time under the current regulations. We basically started following the cows with silage compound for a couple of years. Fields that were significantly low in K, we targeted them with things like muriate of potash. We limed 1/3 of the farm per year, or per rotation, and it's taken the guts of 5 years to get where we are. I suppose one of the biggest changes I've seen in grassland management over my time is bales have replaced topping, basically, as a form of grassland management. And the unfortunate thing about bales is if you don't keep track of where they were taken, those paddocks take a hit fairly quickly. So we're fairly confident now are very lucky with the low emission spreading, that once a field is taken out for bales, we get onto that field with dairy washings come slurry as quickly as possible. And that's put a balance on the thing, where we're taking off, we're putting back on.
And you have a very reliable contractor service that we witnessed the day that we were with you. He was in the yard with you, and that's how you're focusing to get your K back onto your silage ground.
Yeah, well, I have two. I have one guy who spreads with an umbilical system in the spring, which empties our lagoon with a trailing shoe, or with a dribble bar, I should say, which is very good. And then another guy who is a tanker with a trailing shoe who empties the tank with the dairy washings, slurry, whatever. It depends on the rainfall, really. But he goes onto those paddocks that have been taken out for bales, and he can spread really at any cover, to be honest. And cows can get in there again and graze within probably 3 or 4 days.
So you're utilising the advantages that are available to you.
Yeah.
You said that you soil tested every year there at the outset of discovering the problem. Did you find it frustrating in terms of the slowness of the building?
It was frustrating, yeah. You think this thing is going to be solved fairly quickly, and then you sit down and it's expensive as well, you know. You're putting capital fertiliser into the place, and there's some change when you actually have the things solved and you go back to maintenance fertiliser and you say that's gone off, that bill has disappeared, but it takes a long time to get it up and there's a significant cost. You know, I might have said on the video there wasn't a whole lot of investment in the farm over the 6 years, but there was a lot of money invested in soil fertility, and a very important investment, you know.
Yeah, very good. Henry, I think you might be lucky of the three lads. You probably have a naturally high kind of pH in the soil that you have, but it's not a done deal either from your perspective. So you have had to focus on soil fertility as well.
Yes, Stuart, very much in that what we found a lot of the least farms we took on, we were lucky enough to get them, but the thing is they had actually been depleted for a period of time through silage harvesting and so on like that by the previous owners and the previous farmers. Or in particular if they were rented prior to us getting it to a third party. So for the early years, all of our slurry went out at home, and that had a fantastic impact in terms of rising the status of P and K on the farm. One of the things we were very clear from early on was that any amount of K can be purchased in any given year by farmers once you stay within the guidelines. And we actually had significant problems on all of these farms with K. You know, index 1 was a common way to get it, or bare index 2. So we went about it over a 3 or 4 year period between slurry and K applying it. As you say, Stuart, we have a fairly good pH, but at the same time, every time we reseed, 2 tonne of lime goes out on each paddock, and we actually have been on a programme for the last 7 or 8 years now where we apply as little as a half a tonne of lime on average per hectare per annum. So we just keep this little bit of lime constantly ticking over. And I think one of the things that's also important in all of this is while a lot of our P limits are well restricted, the important thing is not to leave any year go without using the maximum amount of P that you can purchase. So when you add targeted slurry combined with the correct pH, apply purchased potassium, you can go about rising the indices, and as stocking rate increases, then they're naturally recycling the slurry. So at this point now we cut no silage at home because of the stocking rate. So it would be very, very rare that we're getting surplus paddocks off mid-season. And as David made reference to it, you know, you're actually looking for places to put dairy washings now. So most of our slurry is now starting to go out the road gate, as we'll refer to it, to the out farms where we are cutting and harvesting the silage, and the slurry is returned to those paddocks.
Putting back what you're taking off.
Very much so,
yeah.
Very much so.
And again, Conor, I suppose you're very much a person that I associate with soil fertility. I suppose the nature of your land, the high rainfall is probably hard on lime, very hard to build P from the work that we've seen at John Leahy's and so forth. So you've had a lot of work to do in terms of getting your soil indexes up, but 90% of the land is in good order now, including the new land, like so.
It is, Stuart. Yeah, I suppose we like you said, we're very we're hard on lime, about half a tonne an acre per year. So we lime a lot. We lime regularly. We have in 2016 when the tour was on our farm, we had slightly neglected the K in that there was no limit in it, and we weren't up to speed in the K. A lot of our problem was falling down the K, so we have gone and corrected that. And on the P side, then, you know, we're testing every year now. We're using all our allocation, and we're targeting slurry to the lower fields. But it's been a long road. We're on the soil fertility. I think about nearly 10 years at this stage. I think I done the Grasslands conference with Dan in 9 or 10 years ago, and we had probably identified at that stage. So we've been a long time at trying to do this, and you know, similar to the heavy soils program, there is a lock up there, and it takes a while before it starts to get released back out. So.
Okay, and then just I suppose a very common problem that I would encounter in my day-to-day role in terms of lime is this perception of it softening the soil quite significantly, and it's a big issue on heavier soils. Would you care to comment on that?
I don't find it. I suppose all our farm would have been fairly young anyway, reseeded ground. We haven't that tough, the tough skin that people talk about. So we'll lime when we can. So we don't wait till fall there to lime. we're going out in April or May or June. It doesn't matter. Whenever we get a chance, if there's a lime requirement there, we're going out spreading it. We have generally when we get our soil results back in January, we see what paddocks need lime, or what paddocks are even going close to 6.2 or 3 is needs lime by us at this stage, because we're targeting over 6.5. So we have a load of lime then tipped in the yard in the 1st of April, and we get a chance that goes out. We're not waiting for the lime to come and contract us out. See an opportunity after the cows, the lime goes out straight away.
Okay, so and coming back to, like you've said, the 10-year journey, and you're on something similar, David. It's expensive, you've all alluded to that. It's slightly frustrating, but can you see the benefits in terms of the swards that you've started to grow now, more so in the last number of years as soil fertility has improved? I suppose I'll put it to each of you. Have you found the benefit of it, even in the older ground, David, like we'll say, to improve the soil fertility? Have you found it of benefit to it?
I would say we're only really starting to see the kick now, to be honest. Maybe like there was probably small savings on nitrogen. The soil didn't seem to be as hungry for nitrogen once the pK and pH was corrected. You know, you probably need a new grass to kick on the actual tonnage grown. But certainly it's soil that's not as addictive to nitrogen, I would say, once the soil fertility is corrected. Yeah.
Henry, in your experience?
Yeah, I would actually think lime brings even greater benefit than any of us give it credit for, in that I think it's stimulating a lot of activity in the soil. You made reference there maybe to losing the tough scraw on the surface, but to me a healthy, vibrant soil will be a soil that's fairly fluffy and deep. It's possible for the roots to go deeper, because I think that's the secret. We've got to encourage the grass roots to go deeper in pursuit of the available nutrients, because a lot of fertilizer applications are on the surface, and over a couple of year period they're lost below the growing root. So I think lime has a major role to play in making them available first of all, but in conditioning the soil that the roots penetrate deeper and access available nutrients.
So coming on from what Henry said there, Conor, like in terms of aerating the soil and drainage of the soil, would you have seen it from when you started your farming career? Like you had a lot to do from the start. Probably the mindset was probably slightly different in terms of you were wanted to push it on and so forth. The liming program, when you implemented that, did you notice an improvement in drainage actually to go with it? Definitely.
We found that the best fields to go at in the springtime were the ones that got a heavy application of lime the August or September before. We found an awful a visible increase in earthworm activity after liming. We still do, so we find it drains the soil more than anything.
Very good. So that's coming back to what you said, Henry, obviously. So look, we're just going to cut to Mike Egan, who's next door. Mike is going to talk to us about Clover, as it's going to be a very important part of the future agricultural systems for the three gentlemen that are here with me tonight and for everybody else. So we'll cut over to you there, Mike, for the just an update in relation to Clover. Thanks.
Thanks, Stuart. So I'm just going to talk about the three main benefits that we can see by including white clover in our pastures. And I suppose if we break it down into the three main categories of number one, the animal, number two, the sward, and then the environment or reduction in nitrogen. So from trials in Moorpark and Clonakilty, we've seen by including white clover in our swards, we can get up to a 12% increase in animal performance through increased milk yield and milk solids production. And I suppose that's coming from the increased quality that clover is adding to our swards. So clover generally has a lower fibre content and a higher crude protein concentration. So this is driving a higher dry matter intake on our cows by up to 10%, which is giving us that extra milk production in the animals. We've also seen at similar levels of nitrogen application, we've seen an increase by up to 15% in dry matter production per year. But couple that then, because clover is a legume and it can fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, white clover can fix up to between 80 and 100 kilos of nitrogen depending on the volume of clover. And some of the trials that we've seen is maintaining a similar level of production as grass-only swards with 250 kilos of nitrogen. However, with clover in the sward, we can reduce our nitrogen fertilizer by 100 kilos while still maintaining the similar level of output in terms of dry matter production and still getting that benefit in terms of the animal performance in increased milk production. I suppose going forward, how do we incorporate our clover into our swards? And I suppose Stan said it earlier on, the importance of soil fertility in terms of growing grass and the sustainability message going forward. But in terms of establishing white clover, if you don't have the correct soil fertility, and that's again index 3 for P and K and a lime status of 6.3 or above, if we don't have that correct, it's extremely difficult to establish white clover in our sward, and even if we get it established in terms of maintaining that in the sward going forward. So again, we must target our soil fertility to be correct in terms of maintaining and persisting and establishing that clover in the sward. And I suppose going forward with the recent announcement from the department in terms of derogation farmers, all farmers that are in derogation now must include white clover in their swards when reseeding at a minimum seeding rate of 0.6 of a kilo per acre. But in terms of if we want to get that clover included in our swards and get that benefit, we need to look at inclusion rates of 1 kilo of white clover seed per acre in the sward. And again, in terms of the two main methodologies of, I'm not going into detail, but in terms of the two main methods of including clover in our sward, it can be a full reseed in terms of including the clover in the seed mix. And then if you want to do a larger area at your farm at a time, I suppose the other option is oversowing or putting white clover into an existing grass-only sward. But again, our grazing management and our soil fertility are key in terms of helping that clover establish and persist long-term into the future.
Over the years, the smells disappear. You don't notice the dirt. And you don't notice the dangers. Always beware of machinery on the farm.
Thanks for that, Mike. And so quite clearly, lads, the clover is on the agenda, whether we like it or not now. The department are insisting that it's going to be incorporated. David, you said to us when we were with you a couple of weeks ago that you tried clover 20 years ago, but you're going to try it again. I suppose will you just elaborate on what didn't work for you when you had it 20 years ago, and what are you going to do differently this time to try and make it work?
I suppose maybe there wasn't as much information available 20 years ago. Certainly not as much as now. There was a large leaf clover called Arn available at the time, which was tremendous for 4 or 5 years. It was actually so good that it practically eliminated the ryegrass. Then it disappeared itself and the weeds took over. So after that we said never again. But to be fair, and we have good research in this country, and the information is coming out of places like Clonakilty and what have you. It looks like there's better varieties available. The medium leaf clover seems to be more persistent. We can see the lift there in terms of milk solids and whatever, and I'm just going to follow the advice maybe this time rather than trying to do things myself like I did 20 years ago. So, yeah.
Very good. Henry, you've some clover obviously in your reseeded ground that we saw in the video, and you other pasture on the farm that's been reseeded and has clover incorporated into it. Your naturally high pH soil is going to be of benefit to you, but in terms of grazing management and so forth, your comments in relation to that?
I suppose somewhat similar to David, we would have sown a lot of clover in the past, but our management practices simply weren't conducive to protecting the clover. I suppose the first experience I'm having of the last couple of years is we've backed off completely on nitrogen on the out farms because of our overall stocking rate. We haven't been pushing the out farms to the same extent as the milking platform. And on most of the out farms, we're now seeing an explosion of clover. So it can be done. I suppose the second challenge we have is weed control. And that really is one of the destructive elements to clover, is that if you're attempting to we'll say, control or remove weeds while clover is grown actively, we have a problem. We're not able to manage, the two things can't be managed. And the third thing I think we need to be very, very clear on is dairy farmers by their nature listen to all scientific information available. We have probably the leading research practice kind of in the world in Moore Park. They're coming out with very, very good technology and techniques, and I believe they're coming with practices that if we implement them, we will learn how to grow clover. And I suppose the final part is, whether we like it or not at this stage now, nitrogen usage is going to be restricted. We've got to find an alternative way to grow the same tons of grass. And we're seeing also from Moore Park research the quality of the feed mid-season coming from a clover sward is significantly superior to a grass-only sward. So there are a lot of reasons and attractions there to embracing the clover. So we've just got to educate ourselves and make use of best information available, best practice at the moment.
Very good. So Conor, you're a very good grassland manager. You're on a heavy soil and you're concerned, you want to go down the route of clover, but you're a little bit nervous about going that direction as such.
Yeah, I suppose all the reseeding we have done lately has been tetraploid monocultures, so we're kind of getting ready to stitch in the clover. I don't believe we have any problem getting the clover to grow, but it's the persistency of getting the clover there. I have the concern about cleaning out the farm the end of the year to give the clover the chance over winter, about stimulating the clover to get going in the springtime. Will we be able to get in and get with bare patches in the field, get it grazed in February and get it stimulated to grow, or will we be housing cows for longer, for 3 or 4 weeks longer? They're my concerns. And can we keep it persistent? If we get a wet summer, are we going to see the persistency enough in that to get? So I have questions for Moore Park. I think people are willing to try it, but I think the researchers have to come out onto the heavier and higher rainfall areas than Moore Park. And Henry is the west of Ireland person too, but Henry's rainfall is significantly less than what we even carry, and a slightly drier soil. So, we need help to get it going.
Yeah, sure. It's definitely a learning curve, and Fergal Coughlin would have spoken at our dairy conference in January and spoke about how they've had to even adapt in Clonakilty like they learned the lessons that you're talking about the struggle there over the winter. But I suppose you're more than willing to take it on, but it's just the management practices around it that are important to you. The other sustainability measures, this famous word you alluded to today, I was out with you, it's all about sustainability now. In terms of all aspects of sustainability, environmental, financial, from your own perspective, we'll say from a family point of view, what direction do you see your own businesses going? And I suppose we'll stick with what I've been with all along, and I'll start with you again, David. In terms of the future direction of the business, you're really throwing off big milk solids now. Where do you see your cow's capacity for that to go off? Both in terms of the genetic capacity of the cow and also with further improved soil fertility, an increase in reseeding, maybe the benefits of the extra production that we can get from clover. Where do you see yourself if we were to come back to you again for another throwback tour in 5 years' time? Where do you think you're going to be at that point?
Well, as far as grass grown, I think our farm will never be a 16-ton per hectare farm, given the mix of soil types we have. If we get somewhere near 15, I think that's sustainable on our farm, because you're going to get bad years, so one with the other. If you can average 15, you're going pretty well, As regards cow numbers, we'll lift the cow numbers to match the extra grass grown. So for an extra ton grown across the farm, our farm would basically equate to 10% extra cows across the farm with no increase in purchase concentrate, which is around 500 or 600 kilos per cow at the moment in a normal year, if there is such a thing. As regards the cows, Moore Park are talking about a 5 lactation average. We're probably going to settle around 4.2 this year. I'm hoping we can get to 5 lactations without other issues are raising their head, which none of us have had before, because all been expanding with younger herds of cows. And it's only really when you stop expanding and a herd of cows starts to mature and you realise the actual true potential of these cows, So the data coming out of Moore Park there, you're looking at the next generation herd is going very well. So we're producing very good black and white cows in this country. The data as regards to New Zealand Jerseys is very, very good. Effectively, that's what we've been doing for the last 5 years, is we've been crossing those 2 genotypes, and they're performing very well on our farm. So, yeah.
Do you think there's scope for more so?
As regards cow performance, well, I mean, the best cows in our herd are up around 700 kilos milk solids. I think if we can keep the empty rates low and have a 20% replacement rate, I think, and take out the bottom 3 or 4% of the cows per year on performance, I think we might be pleasantly surprised at how cows will perform in our systems. I'm just starting to learn it, and I think for guys who are expanding with young herds of cows, let's say, there is a big lift there when you actually let the herd settle and be in position to actually cull selectively.
So that's a bit of advice for both Henry and Conor nearly as well, who have both expanded significantly, I suppose, in the last number of years. Henry, where do you see your herd going into the future?
Yeah, I would be very clear. We've lost a little bit of the sharpness in terms of milk solids output because of the herd growth. We haven't been focusing enough of our energies on removing the bottom 10%. So that's definitely the first target. The second part of it that we're definitely after is days in milk. And over the last 2 years now in particular, we've moved to 100% AI. We're starting to move to sexed semen. And this year we saw over 90% of the herd calved in the first 6 weeks. We saw 75% of them calved in 3 weeks, and we've just scanned there recently, and we're probably going to hit 90% again now, I would say, plus in the 6 weeks, with again 75% in the first 3 weeks. So days in milk is becoming a very strong driver for us. We're definitely looking at a situation where we're not going to be calving any cows into April going forward based on the current farming methods. So, once we remove late calvers, and in other words, the cows that do the least amount of days in milk. And if we could start to remove the bottom 10%, I would be very hopeful. We're similar to David now. Our herd lactation average is just over 4, but it's 4.0 something. It's just for over 4. It's something we want to push on a little bit. And I think maybe the stocking rate is something we have to address now that might be addressed for us, is that if we can allocate a little bit more per cow every day during the mid-season period and not lose control of grass quality or residuals, there is a possibility we'll see a lift there also. So days in milk combined with removing the bottom 10% and maybe a slightly more generous allocation of grass mid-season, I think we will see an increase. I would be very optimistic actually. We'd see a significant increase in milk solids output over the next couple of years.
Okay, so Conor, I suppose you're going to have the youngest herd profile at the moment, but you're still actually doing quite well considering, I suppose.
Yeah, we're on course to about 450 kilos of milk solids this year, so that's very good for us. We have more than 50% of the herd is first and second lactation. So I think like David and Henry, our cows will do significantly more once we get them settled, especially the newer generation of them. So yeah, we're going to settle down for get down to that 20% replacement or 22% maybe, and leave the herd mature. I think there's a lot of milk solids to be got out of this herd.
Okay, so unfortunately we're running out of time. So I just have one question that's come in there to put to the three of you. One piece of advice that you'd give to a young person starting out on the journey of dairy farming. Again, we'll stick with the rota, David.
I would say again, agricultural education, which is mandatory now anyway, but travel if you can and work abroad, not necessarily in agriculture either. And if you're coming back into farming, find yourself a good mentor.
Be sure it's your calling. Too many people in this country in herd farms choose dairying as a career, but it's not truly their choice. And I think the second thing I would say is early in your career, be very, very careful on capital expenditure. Make sure you spend whatever available resources you have on return on assets, which are the soil fertility, your cow type, and just focus on the areas that are producing money, not the areas like concrete that consume money.
Conor, last word to you.
Yeah, I suppose to kind of carry on from Henry, if you have limited resources, put it into the stock and the soil fertility.
That's what you've done in your expansion phase.
Yeah, make sure that the soil fertility, you have to grow the grass, and then you have to have the cow to convert that grass into milk solids. So make sure if you're starting ahead that you're buying a cow that's capable of eating grass and convert it to milk solids.
And be willing to spend your money.
I wouldn't compromise on the cow, because that's going to be the basis of your herd for the next 20, 30, 40 years.
Okay, so we're just going to show you a brief montage of the footage that we have taken off the three farms over the last couple of days. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for questions for the lads, and when we return, we're going to be joined by Tyke Buckley, Head of Agriculture with AIB. So I'm joined by Ty Buckley, Head of Agriculture with AIB. Obviously our sponsors for this evening, and thank you for kindly backing us in the development of this event tonight. Very different to what we're normally used to. So Ty, I suppose we've asked you to just have a brief word with us in relation to the future of dairy farming from the bank's perspective, I suppose, and the future of milk price. Obviously, we've spoken in other fora in the last couple of months about milk price. Came into the year in quite a strong position, looked like things were going to be really buoyant, and then COVID hit. So the impact of COVID in terms of milk price in the short term, we're all aware of it. It took a dip. It's kind of rallied lately. A little bit of a wobble there again in the GDT in the last couple of days. How are AIB looking at it in terms of the short term and the implications of COVID as well?
Yeah, I suppose, thanks, Stuart. Yeah, I think what you said is a fairly accurate synopsis of what has happened. I suppose when we saw COVID, at the early stages of the COVID crisis, what we'd seen was a real significant drop in the price of dairy commodities. And, you know, at one stage things were looking quite grim for milk price for 2020, but it was remarkable how the rally that took place in dairy markets, not, you know, maybe 3 or 4 weeks into the crisis, and we've seen a real recovery in prices of most of the commodities. Butter is probably the one that's lagging a bit, and we're back up now to, you know, around the 30 cent mark. So if we're looking, I suppose when we look out for the remainder of the year, I think we may be looking at things kind of leveling off now at current levels. And there's always, I suppose, what we've seen. I think part of the recovery that's happened over the last number of weeks is probably linked to a restocking, building back up of inventory. So the bounce that we got from that is probably might be out now. So it may be that prices plateau where they are now. Even if they do, if you look at our seasonality, you know, we look at 60% of the milk produced in the first half of the year, and you project out prices remaining where they are for the remainder of the year, you're still looking at an average base price for 2020 of probably north of 30 cent a litre. And if you look at the price last year, it was about 31, maybe slightly over it. So we're not that far back from where we were last year. And weather pattern has been okay. It was looking a bit, you know, a bit dodgy there for a while in terms of potential drought, but that's been alleviated now. So overall, I think it's looking like it'll shape up be an okay year, barring you see a major re-emergence of a lockdown. I suppose one of the things you have seen is a big switch in the way the dairy products have been consumed. So, you know, real switch towards retail from food service. And that has probably helped cheese a small bit, actually, because from our perspective, like cheese being the type of cheese we produce is a long shelf life, so it kind of helped the retail side of it. And obviously butter as well on the retail side of it. We'd probably be maybe more reliant on the retail side of it as Irish dairy industry than maybe food service from the butter point of view. So overall, I think a lot of changes, and it probably will flip back to a certain extent. But, you know, I'd say there are probably some long-term shifts that are going to occur because of COVID and changes in work practices and things like that.
Yeah, so even in terms of, I suppose, credit insurance was something that was talked about for the dairy co-ops trying to hold on to products and so forth. Is that going to impact on, we'll say, are they going to have to look at that kind of a scenario over the next number of months in particular, as we potentially see a potential second surge? We won't be speculating on it, but like, is that going to impact on milk price then? We'll say, so we've gotten our lift now, is that going to temper it in that they're a bit unsure?
Yeah, I suppose, like, you know, one thing I would say is that, you know, it's obviously no one knows what's going to happen for the end of the year. You would hope that if there's any re-emergence of restrictions, that they'll be more localised and that they won't have the same impact, because I suppose a lot of the new normal has established itself now. So it might mean that it's taking out I suppose the other thing you've got happening as well is, you know, there is, you know, oil price has been impacted, and that does impact the purchasing power of some of the big dairy purchasing nations. So that is the other thing that's probably dragging it a bit. And I suppose as well as that, sterling is, from an exchange rate point of view, is weak enough at the moment and may continue to weaken depending on how Brexit turns out. So, you know, overall, I think it's pointing to maybe prices staying somewhere around where they are for the remainder of the year.
Okay, so you've spoken about the situation in terms of milk price and so forth, but obviously COVID has hit across the entire sector, across all sectors, sorry. Is there a risk, a question that's just come in, is there a risk that the impact of COVID could impact on availability of money in agriculture because there's just going to be a draw on money across all sectors within banking?
Yeah, I suppose I wouldn't see that as being as it's a fair question to ask. There is obviously the economy has taken a major hit, and a lot of businesses are going to need support to get through the current difficulties. Agriculture has been probably fortunate; it's been much less harshly hit than some of the other domestic sectors. But to be fair, from a capital point of view, I mean the banks are, have fairly strong resource to capital. The other thing to factor in as well is that we have, we'd say from a government point of view, there's a credit guarantee scheme that is in the offing. There's also SBCI funding available. So I think those combined with the level of capital that there at the moment, so I don't see it being having an impact on agriculture from that perspective.
Okay, very good. I suppose just one of the things that we probably in the grassland we like to showcase is we have tonight 3 excellent farmers on top of their game. From the bank's perspective, what are the key attributes that you see looking at farmers' accounts? The high performer farmers, what do they do that makes them stand out as high performers?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's something that when over the years and you're dealing with really good farmers, you'd know it yourself, Stuart, you do tend to see similarities, a lot of them. And I think with the 3 farmers that we had up this evening, I mean, 3 guys top of their game. And if you actually look at the characteristics that David, Henry and Connor share, they've got a good network. So like the Grassland Association, I think is a very good example of that. They have a good network to be able to get information from. They take on the information and they adapt it to their own farm as it applies. So you've got you've got Connor, very different farm from Henry, but they're taking the advice and they're applying it on the farm as it sees it. They're not afraid to try new technology or new practices. Generally are good to listen to a lot of people who will take on. They don't listen necessarily. They listen to the right people, I suppose is a better way of putting it. And they're good. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they're generally very good with people as well, and which is a very important part of it.
Okay, so and the people skills is probably becoming more and more important as scale increases as well. So we'll say the good network is something that you recommend. Is there anything else you recommend to people in terms of getting good working with people, because it's going to be fundamental to operating dairy farm businesses into the future?
Yeah, so I think the big thing it was mentioned there, like one of the best, if you're looking at going into a career in dairy or whatever, I think one of the best things you could do is work for someone else for a while, because then you understand how an employee feels in terms of working for someone else's business, because I think that's part sometimes that farmers struggle with, that they see that you're not going to have exactly the same perspective if you're not the owner of the business. So I think that's obviously, and that can help a lot if you can try and think about, put yourself in the other person's shoes and see, well, how do they, what's driving them and what's their motivations? Because a lot of people think, pay is the ultimate thing that drives them. Like, not always at all. And in fact, a lot of cases, it's not that. It's often, if it's a nice place to work, obviously everybody, exactly, and you want to be paid well and paid for what's a fair rate. But if you're working in a place that you enjoy working, you look forward to going to work every day, if that's not there, doesn't matter what you pay guys, you're not going to be able to hold on to them.
Okay, and finally, I suppose just one line synopsis, the future for dairy farming in Ireland in your eyes.
Yeah, I think that we're entering into, what we've come through over the last number of years has been it's been very exciting phase, really remarkable phase, great story that dairy has done. We're entering into probably a different phase now, I would say. We mentioned sustainability, and I know it kind of probably, in some ways, people kind of eyes glaze over now when they hear sustainability because everybody talks about it, but that's the reality of what we're facing now. And I think that the farmers that are going to prosper are the farmers that can, the sustainability is going to impact businesses across all aspects. We focus an awful lot on the environmental sustainability. This week is Farm Safety Week. That's sustainability as well. I mean, everybody has to be working on a farm. Everybody has to be, make sure that they can stay healthy and they stay from all perspectives. I think that's very important consideration as well. And from the environmental side of it, it'll be adapting to the new environment that we find ourselves in, and the farmers that can adapt to that, and will be the ones that will prosper. And I think an awful lot. Mike spoke tonight about Clover, and that's why Clover is so important. And I think we're very fortunate to have an organisation like Teagasc and the research they do for us, because that will help us make sure that we can adapt. And I would be thinking these restrictions will be a challenge, but they'll bring opportunities as well. And if we can, this environment is going to be the case throughout the world. We're not going to be the only country to face it. New Zealand has similar challenges, in terms of what they face. And once we can understand these challenges and understand how we can look at how we will best deal with them and move forward in a way that meets all the commitments that we need to meet, I think that there's no reason why we can't look forward to a bright future.
Very good. So unfortunately we've run out of time. I can't believe how quickly the hour has gone actually. I'd just like to finish by thanking in particular our 3 host farmers who very willingly accepted us onto their farms there a couple of weeks ago to do some filming. So a big thank you to David, Henry and Connor. I'd like to thank my own committee and Paul, the president, for the help that they've given me in organising and preparing the event. Of course, as I said already, to Tig, to AIB for their backing of the event, which it wouldn't have happened without them. Harry Hill and Farm TV for the video footage, which was excellent and really teed up the night for us. And I would also like to thank Niall Claffey from Agriland and the team, the Agriland team that are here with us tonight, who made the broadcast possible. We're very grateful to them. And of course, finally, I need to thank the staff at the hotel who actually opened a couple of days early for us in order to host this event. Huge thanks to all of them. Huge thanks to you all for tuning in tonight. As Tig said, Farm Safety Week. Please everybody farm safely. From a COVID point of view, take care, and we wish you all the best for the remainder of 2020 and into the future. Good night and take care.